Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Clark Coffey, and with me, as always, is the fantabulous Mr. Cullen McFader. What's going on?
Fantabulous. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You don't seem very thrilled with this.
No, I'm
introduction.
fantabulous. I'm
Okay, I mean, just it didn't sound like you had. I don't know. It sounded like you were kind of just, you were a little sarcasm is what I felt there. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Okay, you seem happy
maybe
now.
Just a bit. Maybe just a bit.
Well, you know what? I'll use our time between now and our next episode to try to think of a more flattering adjective to introduce you with. And so my apologies. But hey, everyone out there, we're really excited about this episode. We have a guest that I'm really excited to talk to, Mr. Benjamin Ironside Koppin. He is a filmmaker, and I've known this guy personally for, going on about 15 years. When I first moved to LA, and I was pursuing acting, I was focusing on that career. He was one of the first people to hire me as an actor in one of his first short films when he was still in film school. And we have kind of stayed in touch, and it's been a real pleasure to watch his career flourish. He's kind of got two different sides of his work. He's got Ironside Films, and by the way, I love that middle name. I'm pretty sure that's legit. I think I asked him. I don't remember the story, and unfortunately we don't get to it in the interview. But I love that name. Anyway, he's got Ironside Films, which is the commercial side of his business. And then he's got 1988 Films, and that's where he has his narrative projects. And we're going to kind of focus on that. But he's a director, writer. His wife is a producer on a lot of his projects, and he's a cinematographer. And his story is a really interesting one, especially pertinent, I think, to people who are aspiring filmmakers or just people who are interested in cinema in general, to hear somebody's story, moving from the Midwest to film school. He talks a little bit about his experiences there, and then his experiences and challenges and triumphs of, basically producing his own films. And we touch on a lot of different aspects of that. He's got a film now called Pastor's Kid that's going to hit theaters nationwide on March 15th. So we also touch on that. That's super exciting. So without further ado, here's our discussion with Mr. Benjamin Ironside Koppin. Yay! All right, Ben, it's been a minute.
I know, dude. Thank you for having me on. This will be fun.
Yeah, man, you're more than welcome. I mean, basically, it's just an excuse, really, to get to just catch up and chat with you.
Great.
You've been so busy. One of the big reasons that we wanted to have you on the podcast is because a lot of our listeners are aspiring filmmakers, or they're independent filmmakers. They're somewhere kind of along the process of building their career. And, you and I have known each other now for 15-ish years or something like that.
We're young.
We're getting old. Hip. It's like we've known each other longer than Cullen's been alive. So
there you go. Yes.
No,
probably,
sorry. It's one of the running jokes that I've always got to take a small stab at Cullen. But but it's also part of our shtick that we have we use kind of our age difference when we discuss movies, and kind of use that as a different lens to kind of look through when we discuss different films. But yeah, and so we've known each other for about 15 years, and I think that was at the beginning kind of your college experience, right? Like your film school experience. But let's even start before that. So I'm always kind of curious to hear why people get into this wonderful world of filmmaking, and what inspired you to become a filmmaker when you were young. And then we can kind of walk through. I'm also curious to hear about your film school experience. But let's start with kind of what was the seed? When was that kind of planted for you?
Yeah, my dad had the old school VHS camera, right? I mean, you hear these stories all the time. And we made, my brother and I would make dinosaur movies and all sorts of stuff. And I remember my dad showed me Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I can't remember, I was probably like 7 or 8, somewhere in that range, and it like blew my mind. I remember walking through the kitchen, number one, and being terrified spikes are going to shoot out and kill me. But I love the idea of fighting Nazis. That was really cool. I thought that's kind of what an archaeologist does, is like search for things and fight Nazis.
Sure.
So,
and avoid quicksand.
Exactly. And so we'd watch a lot of History Channel stuff on like Egypt and different places. I'd be like, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And then I kind of found out that archaeology is kind of not as exciting, I'll put it, as what Indiana Jones portrays. And you don't really get to fight Nazis, at least that often, from what I hear, unfortunately. I mean, probably fortunately.
Yeah.
But you know, that made me be like, man, if I can't be Indiana Jones, how can I help bring that same emotion that I felt watching Indiana Jones to other people? And so that's kind of what dug me into film and just exploring different types of film. I feel like I was raised in a Christian household in the Midwest, and my mom was very against witches. Witches and horror movies were two things. So I didn't see Hocus Pocus till I was like well into my 20s, or Nightmare Before Christmas.
But thankfully not against dinosaurs and archaeologists.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. So we were good on that. But you know, I didn't get into horror until college is when I started to really get into like the George Romero stuff, like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. And you kind of quickly learn that there's good horror and kind of the you know, not as good horror, I'll put it that way. But the big thing for me being like a Midwest kid was, dude, the library had these DVDs, right? That you could go and rent.
Oh, that's right. You're young. They had DVDs.
Yes, so that's me. Yeah. Yes. But you could rent DVDs, and you know, I kind of went through that, you know, Indiana Jones phase, and you kind of get into horror a little bit, and then as I'm flipping through, started to get into these like Sundance, like early 2000s indie Sundance movies, and you had like 13, if you guys remember 13 at all, was like a drama about like a girl growing up and becoming 13 and the world she was in. There's another one called Mean Creek that has the Koppin brother in it. United States of Leland was one that had Ryan Gosling in it. And then there was one that hit me Saved was another one. It was about like a Christian school with Mandy Moore that I found really powerful. And then the one that hit me the most was one called Manic. And it has Don Cheadle, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Zooey Deschanel in it. And it's about these like teens that, you know, kind of dysfunctional teens. They all have different issues kind of going into this counseling place that they're staying at, you know, due to different reasons. And they shot it all on mini DV and handheld. And it was such day in the life of, as if a documentary crew was just dropped into the life of these teenagers. There was no plot moving anything forward. There were no beats to hit. It just felt like reality. You know, with these very talented actors, young, you know, in their careers before they had blown up or anything. And that movie has stuck with me ever since. As I was like, man, if I can make something that gives me the feeling I felt when I watched that movie, that's been the new thing to kind of strive for in my life, is like there was just this rawness and reality to it. And so even going into college, Clark, like that's where you met me a little bit.
Yeah.
We were running around with DV cameras, handheld, you know, natural light, grimy, you know, trying to make things feel honest and real and authentic. And
yeah,
now, I feel like that's been a through line for me.
I'm curious. I want to ask you for maybe a little more detail at some of these milestones. You know, so because I share some similarities with you in that I grew up in the Midwest and couldn't have been more removed from the film industry.
Right.
And I was deeply moved by cinema as well when I was young. And I had very similar thoughts. Like this feels so important. This is like so impactful to me. I want to be able to do this for other people. I want to create these things to connect with other people as well. And so I'm curious, kind of, how did you get from I'm in the Midwest, I really love movies, but I don't know where in the world or how in the heck these things are made, to I'm studying filmmaking in Southern California?
Honestly, you know, it was one of these things I have to really give my parents like huge credit, because they bought us our first editing computer. Back then, it was, you had to like beef out and like pimp out like a desktop box computer. So we had a Sony Vaio. And then they got us Adobe Premiere, I remember pretty early on. So I was
Wow.
editing in Adobe Premiere like in junior high, like making videos for school. And then over the years, I think we did this thing where, we would cut grass or try to make some money, but they bought us a Canon GL2. It was like you raise a certain amount of money and we'll meet you. And the Canon GL2 was like the coolest camera. Like back in the day, I can't even remember how much it cost, but I think it was one of the first that could shoot either 30 or 24p, something like that. So you're over here like, it looks like a movie now, you know?
because it could shoot 24p. Yep.
Yes,
at 480, 480
Yep.
lines of resolution, and it was
Exactly.
like one of the first cameras available to a consumer that could do
Yeah.
that. It's like, whoa, yeah,
Yep,
mind
it was
blowing.
a big deal. So my parents were constantly supportive of us in the arts, and so then my brother, he's 4 years older, so he came out and went to a college called Biola University out here. So he kind of paved the way, and then I went to the same school later on. So it was cool, kind of like, as he transitioned and left and went to college. I'm not saying that me and my brother aren't really competitive towards each other, but there was kind of this idea of like, I would see the stuff he would be making and I would try to push myself to match the quality of the stuff that he was doing. Even I remember when he was in college, I was really eager to make a feature film. And he was like, write a script, do it. And he was very supportive of it. And so I remember I wrote a feature script and I tried to get my friends together and I talked about the amount of commitment they would need. And everyone was like, nope, I'm not doing this. Like one day is one thing, but like 2 weeks is way too much for us. And so I ended up never making that film. But yeah, that's kind of how it went. It was just me and my brother making stuff. My dad is he worked a business type job, but he had been studied operatic singing. So he's a big operatic singer. He'll sing in church and stuff like that, do big performances and stuff. He has an amazing voice. And so, we always had the arts growing up. We'd go to plays a lot, we'd go to theater. And so we were very supported, and I'm very thankful. Like my parents were awesome and they were like, try it, go for it. If it doesn't work, like figure something else out. Like we trust that you'll figure it out, but do it and try it now and see what happens. So
That's amazing. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm curious if there were any, your experience kind of making home videos at home and growing up in the Midwest and then moving out here to Southern California. Was there anything that you were surprised by or kind of, as you went through the process of going through school? Now you studied film, correct?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Was there anything like that kind of blew your mind or was kind of like on either side where you were like, oh my gosh, like this is demystifying the process for me. I can really do this. Or maybe the other side of like, oh my gosh, this is like dauntingly huge. How can I do this? Or, anything in between or...
That was the flip for me, is I felt like mentally I was like, because my brother was out here in California going through film school, in my head I was like, oh man, once you get to that point, it's just going to be all these guys wanting to make movies all the time and we can all support each other and do each other, work on each other's sets and all these things. And then when I got to film school, I felt like it was very isolating. And a lot of people were they're at college just to have fun and have a good time. And that's fine. I'm not trying to like poo-poo on that or anything. But when you're
you
there,
totally
like,
are, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I've waited so long. And you know what I'm saying? When you've been in the Midwest, like the entertainment business is just not a reality in the Midwest to a certain degree. And then you work so hard to get out here to go to a film school that you've like worked your butt off to get to.
You're taking it seriously.
Exactly. And then everyone else is just like goofing off and wanting to party and just have fun. And you're over here like, guys, let's get together and make a movie. Nah, it's not for a class. We don't need to do it. It's not for this. We don't need to do it. And so that was a little frustrating. And then on the flip side too, I feel like, not that film school is bad, but it kind of did the opposite for me, where it was like, I was used to being a one-man run and gun, right? That's what you do because you didn't have people or you had friends. I remember, literally, do you guys remember a boom pole with a sock on the end of it? Because you didn't have a muffler for your...
Boom
pole.
It was like I remember a broomstick.
I was going to say a broomstick or a 2x4 or something.
Yeah.
Or a 2x4, that's great. But yeah,
you're gonna have some hefty shoulders by the time you're done holding up a 2x4 for hours. Yeah.
But then you go to college, film school, and it's like you have to take these courses before you can rent out a camera, or certain people only get certain gear on certain times, and all this stuff, and all that stuff. And one aspect that really drove me crazy, it was like you need to pick one track and follow it. You can't just do all different types of things. It's like you want to be a director, you can only do that. You can't know how to edit or know how to shoot or any of these things. I'm over here like, for me, I think the best directors know all those different aspects to a certain degree. Not that they're masters at all of them, but that they can know. Like I think even Christopher Nolan talks about how he started doing corporate videos and how healthy that was for him, just to know the basics of how to do these things, as a filmmaker. And so I think for me, the film school that I went to, there was a lot of pros and there's some cons, but that was a little irritating. It kind of made you feel like you couldn't do, there were gatekeepers already, and you couldn't make things. Whereas before, it was just like, let's get the camera with some friends and make whatever we feel like, or whatever we're inspired by. Yeah. So that kind of pushed me back. But then I added an art minor to it. And when I went into my art minor, everything was about go create. Everything was about the power of art and what you can do with it. And it's a Christian university I went to, and one of the things that in the film industry, it was either like you make movies and never talk about what you believe, or you just go work in a church and you be a Christian church video guy. And that didn't fit me. You know what I mean? And there was not like. Not that you need to be blunt about your faith, but how can that integrate in part of your storytelling? Like you look at like The Lord of the Rings or some of these films that have very deep, spiritual layers, right, that you could pull from. And it's like, teach us how to put that within our stories and make stories that are meaningful and powerful. Not that they need to be Christian movies or forcing a belief on anybody. But when I took my art minor, it was, all art is created by God, so don't be afraid to express yourself. Don't be afraid to make things and create. Even someone said, like, if God truly created all the colors in the world, you can paint a canvas red, and that is just like paint it just red, and that's showing an attribute of God's creation. And so for me, that really freed me up of, not being afraid of, like, we can tell whatever stories we feel called to tell, or we can incorporate things we need, feel like we should incorporate. That was an interesting one. Is like I kind of saw this like a little bit battle between the film department and the art department, where the art was like all of these things, and then the film department was like, hide who you are, don't ever talk about anything that it basically the idea of like you want to like get into the industry and just like work your way and be successful.
I find that fascinating though, because I think that's a really real thing. Like as we're all independent filmmakers, I found that it can be really tough to kind of present something that's deeply personal, because there is this weird structure in a lot of even independent film that kind of, I guess, wants to appear like it's bigger than it is, where it's like, oh, well, we can't do that, or we don't do that, or we need someone on set doing this just because that's how it is. And I never like that answer of just like, well, why do we have to do it this way? And then someone just says, well, that's just how it's done. Beyond that, they don't know. And so I find, that's totally like resonates with me a lot of having the ability to make something that maybe isn't necessarily commercial, or even kind of shaking off that fear of being like, is this going to be commercially successful? And instead just doing something that's really, really personal to you, and hoping that resonates with people, and hoping that actually is something that people get.
And that's what I would get from those Sundance films I'd rent from the library. You know what I mean? Get these films that felt so authentic and personal, and though I might not share a same story, it's like I can relate and connect to this journey. Yet I go to film school, and they're kind of like, just become an editor and do trailers, and you'll be successful, and that'll be fine. Or just do this and just and not. I don't want to crap on it as a whole, but it's like that was just a lot of, and I don't think every professor believed that. I don't believe they all believe that, but there was just this mentality of like, just fit in and like do your thing. Whereas I feel like, in my point of view now, is it's like your point of view is what makes you who you are, and that's your superpower in storytelling. And so figuring out how do you harness your experience, and again, not that it needs to be blunt in wherever you're raised or whatever your point of view is, but how do you put yourself into your stories and make them personal while you get what I'm saying? Like, while still being able to connect to people.
I mean, I think there's a handful of interesting points here that I want to speak to a little bit more with you guys, and then I want to ask you about the transition from your education, that film school experience, out into the world. But before I do, I want to call out these couple, because I feel like there's a couple really interesting points. One is your authentic expression, creating personal films, right? And how do you do that and also have a career? In other words, how do you meet an audience? How do you sell your work and make a living off deeply personal films? But the other is this kind of where you said you kind of came from this idea of like, hey, I want to be involved in a bunch of, in all the different aspects of filmmaking, and I, just bring some people together and we make this film. And of course, you get into the college experience, and they're trying to prepare you for this, quote unquote professional, film career. And it's like, well, there's unions, and you literally can't do everything. You actually have to, you have to resign yourself to working in one specific place, and there's all this bureaucracy and overhead, and it becomes expensive, and we have to have X number of people on set, and it just, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's so much overhead eventually that it ends up, you can't create a film yourself. Now you're reliant upon money, and a lot of it. And which means, okay, how often are you going to be invited to the party? You're no longer the one throwing the party. You're, you're begging to be invited to the party. So, I kind of holding those two ideas in mind, I want to speak to or ask you about your experience coming out of film school. Did you try to pursue a career in Hollywood, quote unquote, or what was that like for you?
Yeah. So, at the time, and this is kind of, I guess, where I'll probably answer a question and lead in, is like, what's the movie? I can't think of it. Blair Witch had come out probably
like 2000 or 99.
Yeah, in the 2000 range.
90, yeah.
I went to college like 8 to 10 years, before I went to school. So Blair Witch had come out, and then I want to say that Paranormal Activity had come out, or it was just about to come out somewhere around that time. And I remember seeing these films that were made for 10 to 20K blowing up and making all of this money. They're these smaller budget things with smaller budget people. And, the mentality in the film school was this idea of like, go make a $50,000 short film, or go get your uncle's money, however much you can get, right? And make the best short film
the most polished Hollywood studio. Yeah.
Steven Spielberg's going to see it, and he's going to give you $200 million to make that space epic you've always wanted to make.
Spielberg is doing nothing but watching student film.
Right, student film.
He's on the Vimeo staff picks every day.
Yes, he is. There you go. And for me, I always was just like, this seems so old school when we see movies like Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity that are blowing up and succeeding. It's like, why are we not studying those and saying, what's your version that you could put in with your own point of view or your own perspective that you could make for, and give yourself the restraint of, what can I make the best that I can make for $10,000 or $20,000 and a handful of people? Grow us that way instead of just saying you're going to be a cog in the machine. So, anyways, having said that, graduated from Biola, and I went and worked at Lionsgate within their horror department, and that was a really great experience. Yeah. So at that, in that job, we handled a lot of the like EPK, behind the scenes interviews for like horror projects or sci-fi, anything that fit kind of that vein. So we got to interview Ridley Scott. We got to interview Francis Ford Coppola, Guillermo del Toro, George Romero, who was my guy that I got into horror through. Handful, I say Guillermo. Yeah. Anyways, handful of other just amazing filmmakers that you're over here like.
Okay, let me stop you. Let me stop you for a minute.
Yeah.
Let me stop you. And I always apologize for interrupting, but sometimes I fear a moment may pass. So forgive me.
No, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna digress. I'm gonna ask you for some gossip. Any fun stories from having met some of those filmmakers, doing the interviews? Especially curious about Ridley. But if you have any interesting, I'm not asking you for dirt. I'm not asking you to talk trash, but I'm just curious if you have any, if you want to talk trash, hey, that's okay too. But, no, not really. But I'm curious.
I remember Ridley Scott just being very stoic and professional, just like straightforward.
Was he smoking a cigar?
Yeah, he didn't have a cigar, but no, that would have been amazing.
Come on,
amazing.
If you really want Ridley to open up, buddy, you need to pour him a good glass of red wine, sit it on the table,
Clark,
and
I was just the
you just
camera
swear
guy.
like a sailor.
Yes. I was just
Wait,
the
what were you
camera
gonna
guy,
say?
so
You're just a camera guy. But if I were producing that, I would have had. I forget what he smokes, but Cohiba, I don't know. But I'd have his cigar and I'd have his wine right there. And have the whole bottle, actually.
Oh, dude, that's so great.
Anyway, sorry. But okay, dude, so Ridley stoic, yeah.
Guillermo del Toro is so sweet and kind.
I would imagine.
I'm working on his movie right now.
Dude, that's amazing.
So, yeah.
Is that the Frankenstein one? Or are you not allowed to say?
Okay.
Yeah, Frankenstein.
Cullen is up in Toronto, so they're shooting up there. Yeah.
Dude, that's incredible. I hope you have a blast. He's the nicest guy, dude. It's amazing. And he has such a clear vision, yet it seems like he collaborates so well too. You know what I mean? It's that. Anyways, it's beautiful. And then the other one that I remember was John Carpenter. I got to interview John Carpenter. And he has just the driest humor that's just amazing, and just like
I bet.
He's just it was just, we really got to interview the best of people, and and with
now was that
I feel like,
inspiring? Was that inspiring to you,
dude? 100%.
Were you kind of like mind blown? I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine it's like you're right out of college. You've had this passion for cinema, basically your whole life, basically, right, since childhood, early childhood, and now you're 6 feet away from people like Ridley Scott, Guillermo del Toro. John Carpenter, right? These many people would consider cinema legends, right? Living legends. Where's your mind at right now? What are you thinking? Are you like, I'm here? Like, oh my gosh, I'm like 6 feet away. I'm gonna be Ridley Scott or John Carpenter or whoever.
Yes, exactly. And that's where I was. I was like, I wanted to soak up as much as I could in this experience so that I could take it and apply it to what I wanted to do, to the films I wanted to make.
But now, are you still in the space though, where you're like, I can get to Hollywood, like I'm going to be in the machine, but I'm going to change? Like, where were you? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but was it like I can be a part of the machine and still do it?
Yes. So that's where we were. We had moved. My wife and I moved up from Biola's down in Orange County area. We moved up to LA. We were living in Culver City area, over by like Santa Monica, a little close to Santa Monica,
near Sony Studios or whatever.
Near
it is
Sony.
now.
My wife worked over by Sony, and so that was really cool to kind of just be in the heart of the entertainment industry and just see that like everything is sort of touching the industry. And
there's such an energy. There's for anybody who is wants to be a filmmaker or who's just like obsessed with cinema. I mean, it's right. You experience that, I'm sure. I mean, it's just driving around. You're passing Paramount. You're passing Sony Studios. You're in Burbank. You're CBS TV City. It's like all of, and you can just see, oh yeah, that they shot this there and that there. There's just this energy, right? It's just like you're surrounded by it. Yeah.
And I always suggest to like film students, like at least do a season in LA. Not that you need to like live there or make that your full-time place, but it's like at least do a season. Excuse me, and go up and like experience what that energy is like and how the actual industry works. And I think working at Lionsgate, we also had our films at the time were the Medea films. They were Tyler Perry's. Was
oh yeah.
I think it was right. Hunger Games was going to. Divergent was going. The Saw series. My boss at the horror department I worked for, he's the guy who found the Saw series. So he worked primarily in horror.
Which is still going to this day.
Yeah, exactly.
I just saw the most recent one. So
did you? There you go. There you go. So it's still
I feel
going.
sorry for you. No, anyway.
But even like and this was a big pivotal moment. We like our little horror group was kind of like, or I would refer to it as like early MTV. It was kind of punk rock in the way that we did things and the way that we made things. And I'll tell just two quick stories that hopefully answer some of your questions. Like when I interviewed Francis Ford Coppola, like Apocalypse Now is like top 3 movies in my life. And he was doing a movie with Val Kilmer called Twixt. It was Val Kilmer.
Familiar.
I can't remember. Yeah, one of the Elle Fanning I think was in it. And he was talking about how he was wanting to like do it live and like switch out scenes live through this road show. And during our time, we kind of saw that come out and completely bomb and like get like really bad reviews. And that's not, I'm not trying to pick on Francis Ford Coppola at all. I love that he tried this thing, but that was very healthy for me to see that even the icons that I hold up to can still make films that don't connect with people. And seeing how passionate he was about that movie, I was like, I don't really care that it didn't make $1 billion because he went and made something that he felt so passionate about to do, and he accomplished it. And so looking back on his filmography, he can be proud that he did something that he set out to do. And so that kind of freed me a little bit, that even our greats can sometimes like, and I'm going to say mistake, but that's not what I mean, is it just didn't connect at a certain time.
Yep.
And so that helped me be like, it's okay if I make a film that doesn't always connect, even as I'm growing and learning. And then the other quick story was our president of our company. Like I said, he'd been a producer for a very long time, like decades in the industry. He said a filmmaker came to him and said they wanted to make a movie. And he goes, my response to him was, your movie is never going to work because horror people don't like ballet and ballet people do not like horror. And he goes, thank God Darren Aronofsky did not listen to me when I gave that advice, because Black Swan like blew up and became an Oscar winner, I think, or nominated, and did all this stuff. And what he was doing when he was sharing that story, which I love, he was so open, was basically saying we don't know what's going to connect and what's not going to connect. And so basically follow your passion and what you're feeling like you're supposed to make as far as your story. And then, let the chips fall where they fall. Sometimes it'll be a Black Swan and sometimes it'll be a Twixt. But either way, you're putting yourself out there. So
yeah. No, those are great stories. Let's talk a little bit about like the pragmatic. It's just because some of this is kind of the philosophical, right? You're kind of developing your philosophy of filmmaking and your philosophy as an artist, and all of that's obviously critical. And I want to get back to authenticity and creating, putting yourself in your work. But a lot of times people are really challenged with the pragmatic, so it's whether you're in film school or not, but you're attempting to start your career wherever you're at, and you're going to meet a lot of resistance, and maybe more so in this industry than a lot of others, because there's just, only so much room, right? There's only so much money. There's only so many studios. And even though the means of production has become a lot more affordable with digital technology and whatnot, we could talk a little bit about that too, and we can geek out on some of the details technically. But so after Lionsgate, you're kind of philosophically refining, your stance as a filmmaker. Where do you go from there?
Yeah,
like from a pragmatic perspective.
And that's that crazy transition is that, we would go to different film festivals. We went to one called Fantastic Fest, which is awesome in Austin, Texas. I would highly suggest it. It's changed over time, I think, where it's gotten a little bit more, and I'm not trying to poop on it, just a little more mainstream with some things, but man, when we went, they played some of the most outrageous, fun, amazing indie things that you would have never seen. They probably still do. I haven't been in a very long time. But I remember kind of having this sort of come to Jesus moment where I was filming interviews of all these filmmakers, right? And I was sitting here being like, but what am I making? Like, what am I, like, I can sit here and even, there's some films that I saw that I'm like, I could make a better film than this person. I'm like over here, but I'm not doing it. And we had done like a handful of like short films and pitches and scripts. And
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut this interview short. I just realized that I'm not making a film right now. I'm just talking about it, and I'm sorry, guys, but if you don't mind just continuing the interview on your own, I'm gonna go
make a movie.
I'm gonna go grab my camera, and there's some really nice light out on the front yard. I'm just gonna.
Let me know if you need any craft services.
I only partially jest. I mean, I think about this too, right? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I had to kind of put that little fun joke in there.
But that's exactly. It's like I kind of got to a point where I was like, I keep interviewing all these people. I'm watching some of their films. I'm like, I think I could do better. But, like I've said, we kind of took some pitch packets around town, tried to beg people for money. And you spend years doing that, to be honest with you. We probably spent 2 or 3 years with 3
Most
or 4
people do
projects.
spend years,
And we were just pitching and pitching. Yep. And we'd done a handful of shorts and things in that time. But I remember coming to my wife and being like, what if we just like try to get $10K together and just make like a horror movie, like a little slasher movie. And, at the time, like I said, I worked in the horror department at Lionsgate, and I knew what they would buy. Kind of a crappy horror film for, like the lowest they would buy it to put on their channel. And I was like, if we make it in this like 10 to 20K range, I think, and then sold it back, if someone would be interested in buying it at at my horror department, I think we could make our money back. And so we got a group of friends together, and we shot this horror movie called Made Me Do It. I'm not the hugest slasher fan. Like, I like the original Halloween and the original Friday the 13th, but outside of that, I'm not, the biggest guy, but I was like, slasher sells, right? So we made this slasher movie, and we tried to integrate, some of our philosophy or the way we want to do things and things within the film, have it be deeper than just a slasher horror movie, but also still play as that. And then as we were wrapping it up, Lionsgate comes to our horror department and they go, yeah, we're shutting you guys down because we're merging it with a different group. So we're like in post, wrapping up sound, and then all of a sudden they've like merged our horror department with like another one, and our channel was gone. And so now I'm over here just like, well, I got this horror movie. What do I do with it? And so, we took it around town. People watched it, had some offers, good and bad. Then finally went to with a distributor, and it's not been the best experience in the entire world. I'll put it that way. And that's how we learned. This moves on to the next topic for us, Clark. That's how we learned about a thing called predatory distributors that own your movie and never give you a dime.
What a wonderful segue. But and obviously names will be changed to protect the guilty or innocent. Both. But a couple things I want to speak to just really quickly, and I do want to get to some more of this predatory, distributor stuff. So when you kind of set out to make this slasher film, and you said, "Hey, I'm not the biggest slasher fan, but I know that it sells." Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, was it difficult? Like, were you still able to kind of express yourself authentically? Do you think, or do you feel like you were having to kind of make a compromise? I mean, can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think every filmmaker has that experience, right? Or at least ask themselves that question where they're okay. I need to sell this. I have to make a living, or even maybe more generously, it's like I want this to find an audience. And what's kind of in your heart, you might be afraid wouldn't find an audience, right? Or maybe people try to engineer and work backwards, like, hey, I know this, financier who likes this kind of movie. If I put this pitch together, I put this project together that might fit those criteria, maybe I could make that movie. Could you speak just a little bit more to your experience? Because I think it's so common amongst filmmakers,
No, 100%. And for me, like I said, my step into horror was those Romero movies, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead. And so I really wanted to make this zombie film that Clark was going to star in, funny enough.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So, yep. And so we wrote the script, we spent, I want to say close to like $3 to $5 grand to shoot for 2 or 3 days. Because the zombie makeup costs so much money to have like it look good.
Yeah, it was so cool.
You remember that? And so we shot
I remember.
a couple of days, handful of days. We did a pitch deck, had someone do like concept art. This is before AI could just poop out concept art for you. Paid an artist out of pocket to do really cool concept art, put together our deck, and we took it around and just could not get support on it, And it was meant to be this small, like, stuck in an apartment while the, apocalypse is happening, but we had these big moments, a handful of big moments to try to, like, sell the world and what was going on. And, when we looked at our budget and we're like, we spent $5 grand on like 2 or 3 days, and we're talking about trying to make a whole horror film for like 10 grand, like, that just doesn't line up. And so that meant zombie had to kind of go out the window as far as genre. So we had to kind of look what was the peripheral that we could do. And that's where kind of, I think one Halloween I rewatched Psycho. I try to rewatch the Hitchcock films, around Halloween season. And I watched Psycho and I was just like, I can get into that. And I think we were watching Bates Motel at the time too, the show. And I was like, why can't we do our version of like John Carpenter's Halloween having a baby with Psycho, And at the time too, I loved, we had interviewed Rob Zombie with a lot of his, I think he was doing Halloween 2 at the time.
The remake, yeah, he did a
Devil's
handful of
Rejects
remakes.
or something. And I really just loved the grimy aesthetic of like he shot some of it on like 16 and 8mm. And so that's where I was like, let's bring our kind of creativity to this genre and make something different, for better or for worse. So we shot all of our flashbacks in our horror film on like Super 16, VHS, like some of these vintage stocks. And then our main narrative was shot on like the red camera with like cinema lenses. And so that was kind of and the whole point of the movie was the idea that you're finding, like, I was like, how do we find sympathy for Michael Myers? How do we find sympathy for Jason? And kind of have these flashbacks that explain how this killer kind of became who they are. And by the end, he's kind of left with this decision of, does he continue down this path, or can he choose to like own up to what he's doing and do something else? And so that was kind of my way of, like, you're talking about like my Christian principles, if you will, like, how do we bring some of that into the story where we're feeling for this character we'd normally despise, and by the end we're like hoping that he makes the right decision and stops what he's doing. And so that was kind of my way into it, of like taking who I am and putting it within this genre that maybe wasn't the box I was hoping for, in a way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great example. Oh, I'm sorry, Cullen. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, actually, I have a pretty specific question too, that because you're talking about like how you shot it and stuff, and so I got to watch Pastor's Kid last night, and I was curious because I noticed in the credits that you are credited for both the director and the DP position. So I did on my first feature, I did the same thing where I shot it and directed it. And, I have my reasons for doing that. And I'm really curious about, like, because it kind of goes back to our previous conversation about, like, there being a lot of rules around, like, you have to have this person on set and this person on set, and this is the hierarchy of a film, and you have to have, people in these individual positions, and kind of being able to break away from that can be really freeing. And I know, like, even Paul Thomas Anderson on his last 2 movies, I think, has shot and directed them. And so I'm curious to know what your sort of mentality in making that decision was, because it's got a very specific look too. Like, it's got a really, really specific style to it. So there's clearly a lot of thought going into that. So What was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, when we made Me Do It, it was one of those ones that was like my first narrative feature. We basically, I got buddies together. Like my buddy worked at Panavision, so he was able to get us Panavision gear, and for the main narrative. And then we kind of found our little team of people that we kind of knew from film school to like come together. And he came to me, and for better or for worse, I don't know if it was the right decision or the wrong decision, but he's like, so I can get a discount at Panavision on this gear, since I've worked there for so long. So we can get cameras that are this big. Like, no joke, we had one with a zoom that was like so huge. And so, my wife and I, and originally it was going to be a 5D film. It was like, we're going to shoot it on a Canon 5D. We're going to keep it small and tiny, 5 to 10 people max. And then all of a sudden it ballooned to like 30 people, and then you have two red cameras running with huge Panavision lenses. Each card, I think at the time only held like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that.
Oh, gosh, those red mags. Ugh.
You know what I'm talking about. And so I sort of, in that experience, the film looks beautiful. He shot it really well. But for what we were trying to do, I don't know if that was necessarily the right decision to go bigger, because it just blew us up so fast. And I also felt really sad, like empathetic for the actors, because, we're using a dolly, we're using like a real dolly and all this stuff, that it's like, hit this mark, do this thing, cry right here. And when you're making a movie 17-hour days, all nights or whatever, 17 hours a night, but you got what I'm saying, like multiple days, to put your actors through that, I just felt like it wasn't conducive to get great performances out of our actors. And I'm not saying our actors did bad by any means. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that I feel like I failed as a director to create an environment for them to explore and find what felt most honest to them. I'm not trying to say their performances are bad in any way, but I feel like they could have been elevated if I had created a more healthy environment. And so looking back on that film, going into our next projects, I wanted to say, lighting doesn't need to be perfect. Performances need to be honest. That was kind of my trajectory, is like, if a window is blown out, but we're getting an authentic performance, that's what these old Sundance movies used to do. Those are the ones that, you even look at, go back and watch Apocalypse Now, or even was it The French Connection? Some of those movies are like so freaking grainy. Taxi Driver is so grainy and noisy, and that adds to the realism of the experience that we're having. And so for me, I was like, kind of choosing to DP the rest of my films so far has just been, what is and this is going to sound bad, I don't mean it this way, but what is the good enough? What is it's lit well enough, we have a handful of practicals, we're lighting a space so that actors can interact and move around and not feel like they need to hit that exact perfect mark for the perfect hair light. And let's just own that as like, this is what we are as a filmmaker. And the beauty, dude, of these cameras, and I know the new red cameras and all these things, is you have such dynamic range that you can get away with things with just a little light or a practical in there in a way that you couldn't before. So anyways, yeah, that's been sort of my experience. Is like, I just wanted to break free from needing to hit those perfection points with lighting.
And I think it was like what Conrad Hall called it, like magical realism or something, which is just this idea of that, like, it's not, there's a quality to it that is elevated from reality, and yet it still is grounded in where the light is coming from. And I find that that's such an interesting way to work too, because it really, like, even beyond just making it a lot simpler and easier as a logistical thing, I find that it creates these moments where you're not so, like, dug in the trenches about rules and ratios and like the contrast ratios and using false color to make sure that
every light must be motivated
perfectly, and it ends up giving you this really organic kind of natural feeling to everything, like beyond just lighting and things like that, where it becomes so much more I don't know, like you said, conducive to just kind of a creative, all-encompassing experience. So
well, and you may have experienced this too, is often working with, I mean, and this is not to fault DPs in any way, because what they're trying to get out of the work, right, is beautiful shots that they can put on their reel, and in the storytelling, like, but they want things to look high-end and elevated, right? So if something looks too dark or too sloppy, or like they messed up, right, their job, that's not going to be what they want to put out. And so anyways, that's where I kind of would find these conflicts sometimes. I would be like, we'd be tinkering a light, right, for like 15 more minutes. And I'd be like, so we're currently quality-wise, we're at an 8 out of 10, okay? That would be in my head. Is tinkering this light for next 15 minutes going to take us to a 10 out of 10? Or is it going to take us to an 8.5
So you're also an AD as well. Your director, DP, and AD is what it sounds like. Actually,
it's a battle against time on set. All you have are those hours to get in what you need. And that's another thing too, is when we're taking everything off the truck. You've probably seen this too. It's like we take all the toys off the truck instead of saying, this is what we're going to limit ourselves to, and let's work within those limitations and make something beautiful out of that instead of we need every single little piece off the truck. And that's that balance is like ours is going to look darker or more naturalistic and not as polished, right? As someone who's going to take the time to do that, and that's something that I'm okay owning with our films right now.
And so when you're writing, you have, I assume, a pretty specific visual kind of style to writing and like the idea in your head, knowing that you're directing it and likely also shooting it. Like I'm assuming that you've got a very, very kind of good idea of what you want it to look like anyhow.
And even, even with Pastor's Kid, that's our kind of bigger one coming out here, but it's like I pulled, mood boards and had different films I was referencing, printed them all out. And I remember we were filming, and I think we were a few days in, or 3 or 4, and it wasn't like living up to what these other, because we had a bigger budget and someone was interested in putting it in, then last minute they kind of pulled because we went with this R rating that was, a little bit more honest and authentic, and I think that scared some people. And so with that, we had to trim page count, we had to adjust some things, shorten our day, shorten our shooting time. And I remember coming to my wife after a few days in, just being like, it looks like crap. I just hate this. It's just blah, 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 blah. And she's just like, dude, you need to like freaking think of like the Duplass brothers, think of Tangerine.
This is the end of every one of my days, dude.
There you go, yes.
It doesn't matter. If I'm writing at the end of my day, this looks like crap. This is horrible.
Right.
If I'm in production, these dailies look like crap. This
exactly.
I'm so bad about that.
She helped ground me again. That was like, you need to, like, in your head you had this, like, we wanted it to look like Moonlight, like A24's Moonlight was the one that I had as the main reference in my head. There's another movie called Teen Spirit with Elle Fanning that is gorgeous, and I don't remember that cinematographer's name, but she is incredible. If you go, I think she shot the new Black Panther movie. She's incredible. But those are the two that were in my head of what I wanted to reach. And then, we're filming and we're having to move quickly. And so, I'm having to compromise in certain ways. And that's where my wife just helped me shift. It's like, we're going for Duplass Brothers and Tangerine now. That's our goal.
Yeah.
That's the style we're going for because we're doing what we can with what we have. And then she even was just like, don't forget that what was important was the performances, not the beauty of every single shot.
And to clarify, your wife is a filmmaking partner with you. She produces, So just to kind of clarify, because people might be like, well, why in the world is his wife in there, like giving feedback and telling him how to do this or that? I mean, it's your wife. You got to listen to her. But yeah, she actually is a producer and a filmmaking partner with you. So
yes.
That might help clarify. We're gonna get to Pastor's Kid because I've got some questions about that, and I definitely want you to speak to that. That's your latest project, and there's a theatrical release that's coming up here in the not too distant future, so I definitely want to spend some time with that. But before we do, I want to revisit something that I think is a really important topic, and it's talked about some, but I think there could be a greater discussion here to help other aspiring or starting out filmmakers. So let's go back to this distribution question, and let's go back to your specifics. Let's go back to your specific experience with where you felt like you weren't treated fairly, and that you had a nasty experience within the boundaries of what you're able and willing to share. Maybe if you could kind of highlight some of the important things that, what happened to you, and I guess even more importantly, what did you learn, and what could you share with other filmmakers to kind of help them from falling into some of these pitfalls?
Yeah, the biggest thing is have a cap on your marketing. Is when you're working with a distributor, you'll get a contract, and sometimes they will cap the marketing at a certain expense. 15 grand is usually around 10 to 15 or 10 to 20 is what a lot of places will cap it at. And what it is you have to make that money back for them before you see a dime for your film. And so I don't believe in our contract we had a cap. I would say if you can sign a contract that is a 3 to 5 year deal, go for that, because then if the relationship runs sour,
you get the film back.
You get the film back. We signed a 10-year deal, and one of the reasons we signed the deal too, and I want to be careful not to overly. I'm sure there's filmmakers that have had a great experience with our distributor that we went with.
Yeah, and you don't need to name it. Yeah, it's not about that specific. I just want to make sure you don't feel like you don't be obligated to name any names. I think just in general, kind of, things to look for, watch out for, be cognizant of, because it's super challenging. And we're filmmakers, we're not lawyers, right? So it's unless you're hiring an entertainment lawyer, which a lot of people at lower budget levels can't do, right? If your film's 10 grand, you're not going to spend 5 grand on an entertainment lawyer. I mean, you know, it's just, you can't. So
No, 100%. So yeah, that's where I'd say look at those two things. I think a shorter run is great with somebody in case it turns sour. You know, for us even, like this was a frustration as they suggested like a small theatrical release at a theater in LA. And then you show up to the theater in LA and you got all your friends there and the ratio is completely off on the screen. And you know, I think it was cropped in, so it was like people's noses and eyes, you know, throughout the movie. And then you're going over there being like, hey, can you fix it? And they're like, oh, we can't figure it out, you know. And so that was like one part of it. And then my parents even flew out from Indiana to come see the movie another day, and they went up to LA and they're in the theater, and the people just came out and they're like, we can't get it to work today, so we're just going to give you we can't, like, they wouldn't ever do refunds at this theater. So they're like, you can come back another day. And my parents are like, we're flying it back to Indiana tomorrow. We came out for this thing. So then you go look at your budget and you're like, we spent $15,000 to $20,000 on that theatrical release, like for 1 week in LA, and that's what we have to pay back.
And you don't have any visibility into that accounting. You can't actually see where
Until
that money
afterward.
go. It's just 15 grand theatrical release, and you don't see any line item. You don't actually see what did they spend to market it? How much of
Right.
that went to the theater? Did the distributor actually market this release? So that's, you know, so visibility and transparency into accounting, caps on marketing budgets, because it's just, let's be honest, it's extremely easy to hide money in that marketing budget, and that's how they can keep from ever paying you, ever.
Right, and that's where when we get reports, you know, I've gotten recent reports, you know, our film has made somewhere in the like $70,000 to $80,000, you know, when you look at it, and yet we're still like, I want to say $12,000 in the hole or $9,000 in the hole for them. Because of all these like office expenses and other things that pop up. You know, we had to ship a whatever, and a poster. and it cost us
$100.
$100. And so that's where for me, I'm like, we made this little movie for 10, 20 grand. If we had made 80 grand on our own, or even let's just cut that in half. If we had made 40 grand on our own, say we wouldn't have as much of a reach as what they have, that still like pays us back for our movie and gives us a little bit in our pocket.
You can make the next one.
Exactly. And so that's where in my head, just having this experience, I just really don't trust any distributor that's not at that like B or A level anymore, because you just see, and again, I don't think our distributor is out to be, what was the word I said?
They're not out to be malicious or predatory, but these are just challenges.
Yes, it just turns out that way when you're not seeing a dime, you know, for your movie. Like they've had our film for, I want to say 6 years, and we've not seen a penny from that movie.
And that happens to so many people. I mean, this is a story that you will hear over and over and over. And as a filmmaker, you're just so excited for your film to just see any audience.
Right,
you know?
right. Like a good example is our film's not even up on Tubi yet.
Yeah.
And I'm over here like, I've put films up on Tubi since then, and I'm making a couple $100 on these. And again, it's not like we're rolling in the dough, but I'm just like, at this point, I would take a couple $100 for the movie being up there for a couple of months. You know what I mean? Where we're not seeing a dime currently.
Yeah, and you've lost all control. You know, it's for however many years are left in this 10-year contract, you've lost control. But real quickly, just moving from that before we get to Pastor's Kid, because it might be part of this discussion, have you found something that works better for you, or kind of what seems to be working better for you now, having learned from those experiences? Are you doing something different in your distribution tactics?
Yes, so my wife and I actually created our own distribution company called 1988 Films. We were both born in 1988, so that's where we got it from. We actually would just put it up in our movies as like a temp placeholder as we were searching for distribution, and then we were just like, why don't we just do it ourselves? And it's been this very weird thing that, like, I would say over the last 3 years, even 3 to 5 years, indies just aren't, like indie distributors aren't picking up as much. Like they're picking up a handful of films a year, but it's not like what it used to be by any means. Like they used to be able to like figure out how to turn a buck from your small movie, and now it's like, unless you have a name in it, you know, it's just like you're kind of left to the side. Like we would send our current films. We had a movie called Kill a Prophet that Clark's in for a couple of scenes. Another one called Burn My Money. That's a boxing film we actually shot during COVID up in LA. And we were sending that one around to different distributors and different people, and everyone, like the responses we would get were like, this movie looks amazing, we enjoy the story, but we can't put it out because there's no, you know, A or B list celebrities in it. And you're just like, okay. And so that's honestly when we started doing that, And we even had an agent be like, I love this movie. I want to tour it around, but I can't promise anything because the world that we're in right now. He's like,
there's less money. There's just so much less money.
Well, there's
now.
no physical like you don't make money on physical
Right.
media anymore, right? Whereas, a studio used to be able to take a risk on something and hope to make money back over years. Whereas with streaming, it's just kind of it's like a one-time thing, right? You can't necessarily guarantee any future money for it. So yeah, it makes it a lot more difficult.
So yeah, basically we decided to start our own distribution company because I was over here like, I think we can figure out how to do this. And so we call it like building the plane as we're flying it a little bit, where we've made relationships for VOD to get our films out in different places. Last year we signed a contract for physical media, so DVD and Blu-ray. It'll be on Best Buy, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, and a handful of others, probably mostly digital on their website, but they're made to order, so we're not paying any upfront fees, which is incredible.
And you own you retain ownership.
And we own our films. We get to keep our films. And Pastor's Kid, that's the first one that we found a theatrical partner. It's like a theatrical booker or distributor. And so that's where for us, it's kind of like, now we have all the like pillars or whatever. We have the VOD side that we have our connections and our relationships with. We have our DVD and physical media that we can put films out. And then if this theatrical is successful, we now have a theatrical
That's awesome.
partner that we could start shipping films out that way if that's what we feel called to do for certain projects. So.
Right, and you'll continue to learn. I mean, it's as you know, the marketing of these films is extremely, okay, we're doing all this now. How do we get them in front of people? How do we let people know these films exist? And that's a whole other topic for a whole other many hours of.
Honestly, speaking to your indie filmmakers, that's where I'm like, figure out as much social media marketing as you can. It's like, even if it's as simple as boosting ads and just like saving up some budget and boosting ads, that's where with Pastor's Kid we've gotten the most interaction. Is like, I'm talking like 6,000 interactions a day.
So like Facebook, Instagram, advertising, yeah.
Yeah, and the big thing we were told by even like a social media marketer was just try to be consistent. It's like content does not need to be perfect. It just needs to continue to be released and put out there. And so kind of like the big thing, I was talking to one of our actors and I was like, we have to figure out how to like fight against our artistic ego and just be willing to like jump on the phone every once in a while and say, hey, here's an update, and just be excited about that as opposed to,
I fall into that trap. I fall into that trap big time. Is I'm like, whether it's with this podcast or if it's like, promoting my own projects, I feel like so many of us fall into that where it's like, but I feel so weird just putting up like some non-produced, like snippet of something. I feel, and it also kind of just feels weird. I mean, I think you're a gregarious, outgoing guy. I think I think I've talked to you about this before, that you remind me so much of, I'm not saying that you're Kevin Smith. And not in any old, but also like Werner Herzog, for example.
I'll take it.
People, obviously they're radically different personalities, they're radically different films, but I mean the capability of self-promotion, but remaining authentic to their films and to the world that they've kind of created with their films. And I think that's so key. I feel like you basically you have to become a story yourself almost. As much as your films are in today's day and age, to find an audience. It's certainly helpful, and it's really challenging for a lot of people. They don't want to become a personality, or they don't want to become a public figure necessarily. But certainly helpful if you're able to do that. Yeah. Let's talk about Pastor's Kid then. So this is, I mean, and this is, how many films are under your belt? Just because, which number is this for you?
Let's see, we did. It's a handful. We do quite. We make movies. We try. Our goal is to make an indie film a year. That's kind of been our plan. Is like, how do we make an indie feature every year? And some will be bigger, and some will be smaller. But it's like, because we do commercial work in beauty and LA, kind of space.
So this is the other side. Just to kind of let people know, this is the other side. So you do commercial work, and that's what pays the bills, and I assume helps support the narrative side, you're the passion side of your business.
And so because of the commercial side, we have all this gear that we've accrued over time. So we literally have the stuff in the garage here that we can go shoot a feature when we feel called to make a film. And so that's been the beauty, is like, even we did this boxing film, Burn My Money, and that was during COVID, and it kind of came out organically that like my buddy had worked in this like stunt gym. He was an actor I'd worked with, and he's like, listen, dude, COVID has happened. And this is before we knew what COVID was, to be honest with you. None of us knew what this thing was. We just knew guys had been out of work for a couple weeks. And he's like, everybody's itching to like do something. can we make a movie? And I'm just like, I'll come up to like Burbank, for a few days, and we'll shoot things. And so we shot probably 7 days, something like that, probably 7 to 10 with some pickup, with the pickups included. And we shot this boxing movie, and they're like wearing masks while boxing, and we honestly, and my wife was the one that she's like throwing a line, because originally it was just going to be like online boxing was the idea. That's because we didn't know what COVID was. And she was like, as I was driving up, she's like, maybe just have one of the actors throw in a line like, they're doing online boxing due to this COVID thing. And so we just got one take of it in the movie, one line of it to catch. And then COVID became what COVID was, and we were working on editing as everything was breaking loose a little bit. And so,
wow.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, is that it's just, you can find those same kids, like when you were a kid, and you find your friends that want to go make things, is like you can find your little groups that want to just go do stuff. And
there's so much freedom. There's so much freedom in that, and so much fluidity, and so much spontaneity, which can be such a joy. So yeah, I mean, Pastor's Kid. Let's talk a little bit about that. We've brought it up a couple times. It's your most recent film, and it sounds like you had talked a little bit about how important it is for you to create personal films that are deeply meaningful to you, and I think this film is. It sounds like. It also sounds like you've run into, or like at least there was some friction, or I'm kind of curious about this, where you ran into some friction, where like the way that you wanted to do this film met some resistance. I'm curious to hear a little bit about that.
Every day of my life, every day of my life. Yeah. So I worked at a church for a season after FearNet ended. I kind of did some work for a church, and we'd film these testimonies. We'd film these very powerful testimonies. And one of them, we were rushing because the Easter service coming, so we had to film a video really quickly. And I'll tell you, working at a church doing like trying to do high-end video is like a film school all in its own, and it's a beautiful experience. That I would also tell anyone, if you're a person of faith of any kind, go try to work for wherever, if it's a church or a mosque or whatever, like go try to work for that religious organization for you, and just do it for a couple of years and just take it all in, because you will learn, how do I light something beautiful quickly? How do I set things up fast? How do I edit fast? Storytelling, how do I cut together stories quickly? All of it is great. But we were rushing for an Easter service, and a friend that I had worked with, she kind of was worked in all of our arts department, very creative person. She's like, I'll do my testimony, my story. And so we sit down and we film her story, and basically I had no idea. She goes, my mom was an alcoholic, had men, in and out of the house growing up. But we were very wealthy. She had a really great job. We were in a nice Orange County, California home. If you don't know, Orange County is a very wealthy California, county. She's like, we had a beautiful house, nice cars, all these things. But my mom was an alcoholic, and she would, I would have to, as a little girl, I would raise my little brother, and then my mom would be passed out in the mornings. I'd have to go wake her up to go to her job, her big fancy office job, and then she'd, and so she's like, that was me as a kid. Then, as I was getting older, my mom kind of hit rock bottom. She became a Christian and changed her life around. And then ended up, because she was so good at business, she became an executive pastor at the church. And an executive pastor is a pastor that handles kind of all the money and business side at a church. They're not a teaching pastor, but they're still held to a high regard.
It's like the CFO, maybe.
Yeah. They kind of handle that business side so that the teaching pastor doesn't have to worry about it. So she's like, so my mom becomes a Christian and then becomes a pastor, and everybody's praising my mom for being this amazing conversion story. And yet no one is seeing that I was raised with this alcoholic. I was raised with men coming in the house. I was raised with these abusive situations around. I had to raise my little brother. She's like, my little brother doesn't remember much of these experiences, but I do. And so no one's seeing my pain. No one is acknowledging my pain. And so she basically said in her testimony, she's like, I did everything I could to push my mom away and the church away. And that is, partying and getting into drug dealing and all this stuff. So she ends up saying, Mom, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And she goes to college up in San Francisco. And she's a straight A student, has a great kind of job that she's doing. And her little side money maker, she sells cocaine to all of her friends, right? And I'm interviewing her, and I'm over here just like, what? This is your story? This is crazy. And she's just like, yeah, it was a normal day. And she goes, one day, there were a couple of stories that kind of triggered things. And she's like, I got roofied at a bar one night, and these two predators were trying to take me to their car. And my friend saw me down the sidewalk and grabbed me out of these guys' arms, fought me off. And she's like, and I woke up the next day to all these calls from my mom. We hadn't talked in like a year or 6 months, some long amount of time. We hadn't talked since I had, been there. And so it reconnected me and my mom, and she was terrified and worried for me. And she goes, within that same kind of time frame, her drug dealer or provider, I don't know how the whole system works, guys, I'll be honest with you, but he comes knocking on her door one day, and he has no nose because he's done so much cocaine that his nose is flattened in on itself. And so he opens the door and tosses in a duffel bag and is like, the feds are after me and my family, don't contact me again, and sprints off. And so anyway, so she's got this bag full of cocaine and cash, and she's just like, and I asked, like, what'd you do with that? And she's like, well, we did it, and I sold it, and that's what we did. And so what you started to find as she's telling the story is she's using drugs and alcohol and partying and all this stuff to medicate these traumas that she's had as a child that have never been acknowledged, they've never been talked about. And so randomly, her mom invites her on this trip to Sri Lanka, this church trip, and she chooses to go. It'd be part vacation and part church conference. And let's just say she has a spiritual experience, like kind of breaking away from these things and being able to turn and face and acknowledge the traumas that she's had in her past. And I want to be careful not to spoil it too much, but for me, that was such a human story that I was like, so many people can relate to feeling hypocritical from religion of some kind. It doesn't even have to be specifically Christianity, but religion, or parents having, feeling hypocritical from parents having that experience. Medicating in certain ways. I think we all do it. We all have our vices. Like, I love Diet Coke like nobody's business, and that's my vice right now. Hey, you got yours too! Boom. And then ultimately the hope that I think the majority of people nowadays, to a certain degree, are opening themselves up to spirituality in some kind, whatever that looks like. And there can be these beautiful redemptive moments that happen through having those spiritual experiences. So we wanted to tell this kind of like quote unquote Christian story in the most human and honest way possible. Right. And that's what gave us the R rating, is we have language and we have drug use and we have these things that I was like, I want to make this like those Sundance films I watched in high school. And not apologize for it. Just like, let's do it and make it as real as possible. And so, anyways, because of that, we have seen some friction. Like, I originally pitched it to this group, this Christian group that was doing Christian films. And I was like, yeah, we're going to I send them the testimony video. They're like, that's powerful and all. And I was like, well, we're going to do it R-rated and do it real. And they're like, oh, that'll never sell. That'll never find an audience. And they go, unless you sell a book with it, make it PG, you have to sell a book with it. And you have to make it so that pastors want to take their congregation to it on a Sunday instead of like, having service. And so there was all this like, marketing behind that Christian film industry too. That was a little like, again, I'm not trying to crap on it because I think everyone's got to do what they got to do. But for us, that just felt like, I remember calling my wife after that meeting so distraught and being like, do we sell out and make it PG and write a book and do the whole deal? Or do we make it our way? And she's like, screw them, we're going to do it our way. I mean, she probably didn't say screw them, but she was probably like, we're going to do it our way. And so that has been the process of making Pastor's Kid. And every step of the way, we've had, and it's been so funny, the people in the Christian film industry don't get it, but the people who watch it get it. And that's where it's so tricky trying to be like, just watch it. It's just a movie, like a normal movie that happens to have a faith journey in it. Like, my one that I go for is Moonlight. Moonlight is the story of a homosexual black kid, right, coming to discover who he is to a certain degree. I am the furthest thing from that, being raised in the Midwest. I was not raised in the poverty of Florida, yet I can relate to this story, and it does not feel like it's pushing an agenda or like it's forcing propaganda on me. It's just one person's story telling them searching for their identity, right? Why can't me as a Christian tell a similar story of someone's faith journey and not be trying to force anything on you or push a political agenda, but just tell one person's true story? So, anyways, sorry, there's a lot in there.
I think one thing that's kind of remarkable too is that the way that you described the true story of it. Like, so often you find a true story that works but has to be tweaked and adjusted for the medium, and yet from the way that you've just described it now, it seems like it was pretty accurate. Like, it seems like, from seeing the film last night, that it was pretty authentic to the real story.
The one thing we changed is she threw the blowout party in high school, not in college. We switched that because we felt like the drugs were getting the drugs.
It's fake.
Yeah, I know, it's garbage now. But we felt like that led to the blowout party. We felt like that felt honest. But I would say every scene in the movie we're pulling from an honest story or interaction that she has.
It's so interesting, because we've in many of our past episodes we've talked about kind of, I think, the failings of a lot of. I'm not saying this is a biopic but in a way it kind of is, right? A little bit, and there's numerous biopics that we've talked about, and Cullen and I generally kind of share this viewpoint that one of the big failings of these films is that there seems to be this need to kind of whitewash or kind of um, turn complex human beings, and we all are. Every human being is this complex mixture of all kinds of stuff, right? And there seems to be this need to kind of like, okay, well, we really need to simplify this story, and we almost take the humanity away from the actual real person and kind of create almost a caricature, right? And this is often done in order to kind of sell some didactic message sometimes, along with the representation of this complex, interesting human being. And I feel like a lot of times it almost does the opposite, where it kind of takes the humanity and the light and the spark and what was inspirational and motivating about that person and their accomplishments and whatever else it may be. It kind of diminishes that. And so it sounds like that's a little bit of what you were describing and what maybe people were asking you to do to make your film more marketable, so to speak.
Well, and that was one of our decisions early on, was we didn't want anyone to be a villain. We didn't want to just paint someone as one-dimensional. It's like even her stepdad, in later on in the film, he kind of yells at her and calls her out on some things. And I wanted to be very intentional that he realizes he goes too far, and he apologizes to her before he leaves. And even, she has these friends that are kind of parasitic friends, right? Because she has the drugs and they want the drugs. But also that's not just the relationship. There's still these beautiful moments of healing that she's having with her friends, where even one of her friends is saying, go on this trip with your mom. Go deal with this stuff that you've been going through, because we're seeing you spiral, And I think even, that's one of the things which is very intentional for me, is I didn't want to paint anyone as one-dimensional. And how many times have you been in a relationship with someone that's kind of in a shallow relationship, and then you get alone for a little while, and the walls start to go down, and all of a sudden you start to relate on things, and stories come out, and then all of a sudden relationships can get deeper and deeper, and I wanted to express that through this film. There's even a scene, we call it the couch scene, where she's talking to her buddy who's got this guitar, and he's been doing all sorts of stuff, but he shares, I learned to play guitar in my youth group, and here I am doing all these things, and they have this bond of like, different things that have hurt them, been burnt by the church, or had these experiences. Now later on, he's not necessarily there or the best friend in the entire world, but you can have those moments with people and not just make people that you're the villain and I'm the good guy.
Well, I think one thing that really worked too really well is that you seem to have this affinity for doing things in like long uninterrupted takes and kind of letting the actors fill out the scene with their own inclinations. And so I'm curious, are much of that is, the script being there, but you guys sitting down and sort of saying like, take it where you want, or is it all written? Are they reading off and doing it as it's written, and it's just that it comes off that natural?
I wish Courtney, our actress, was on to take that one, because I always sit here and say that we do allow improv. It's totally like hey, if you have a different direction or something to say, like let's do a take that way, but let's let's do a couple takes with the script and then do a couple takes kind of free flowing a little bit. But for especially that couch scene, she is adamant that that's like 99% on the page. So that's one of those that I was very intentional. I tried to cut that scene down so many times, but I felt like there's this intermix of honesty and humor that we just had to hit, that if she sits down at the couch and she's just like, Mommy didn't love me, that's not going to feel real and authentic, and she has to slowly open those walls or take those walls down for them to be able to get to that deep place. And so that's one that, like, I would say from script to screen is it's very, very close, like 99%. And the rest of the film, I would say, is pretty close. But yeah, definitely there's free form improvisation throughout that. I was just like, let's mix it in, or find a different way to get to that question, to that question or that line, as opposed to just hitting it right off the bat. So.
No, I mean, it's impressive because I think the point that works is when you can't tell. Like, I was sitting there, it was on my mind just because of how natural it felt, but definitely in a complimentary way, that it felt like these people were having real conversations about things that they had gone through, despite the fact that obviously these are, actors playing characters. So I thought that was quite impressive.
Dude, thank you, man. That's awesome to hear. And that was for us, that was like, if we can get the authenticity in the performances, I believe people can go along with the story, whether they're of faith or not of faith, whether they're offended by an R rating or not offended by an R rating. If we can make it feel honest and authentic, that's where I'm hoping it can kind of break down some barriers with people where they'll check it out. Or maybe even sit here and say, I've had a similar experience, or I grew up this way, or I had that, and feel like they can fill in some of those gaps with their own experiences and ways, reflect a little bit. So,
yeah, fantastic. That's awesome. I wish you the absolute most success with this film, and I think it's such an inspiration that you've built such a career, that you have created films, like you've stuck to your vision, and even with this film here, that you were like, hey, you know what, we're gonna make this the way that we feel like we need to make this. And because it's, there's just so many different milestones that we come across where it's like you could, I guess, quote unquote, sell out, right? In the ways that would be really devastating to the authenticity of yourself. There's always little sellouts, right? But those are, but there are some but there's big sellouts that we come to at certain points, right? And it's like, ooh, it could be really tempting.
You look at early, some of these early filming, and we're just not. Like William Friedkin, man. It's like we're just not seeing, right now in theaters we're seeing Marvel movies, right? Just like Marvel, and that's where I'm like, if the indie film scene in the next 10 years can kind of fill in that gap and make these films that we haven't seen before with different points of view, I think that can be really beautiful. And I think we're in a very unique place in history where people are like getting tired of that. And listen, I love a Marvel movie and superhero movie, just a Transformers movie, just as much as anybody else. But it's like we're getting fatigued from that, and we want, like, where's our next Taxi Driver? Where's our next French Connection? Where are some of these films that asked us to dig deeper and didn't just play it as, the French Connection is one that's in my head all the time. That's like, Gene Hackman is not a hero necessarily in that movie. We paint him as the hero, but he's also corrupt in certain ways, and it's so anyways.
I'm there with you. Awesome.
Yeah, they're out there, but I mean, it's so much of it's on distribution, right?
A24 has picked up a lot of that stuff, I feel like, over those years, but
they're
now
carving
I feel
a
like,
niche,
I feel like A24 now has a tone that you're expecting, when you go into it a little bit more.
A little bit, yeah. It's kind of, it starts to kind of feel a little bit like a factory, but it's
like
still
a brand.
A brand. Maybe that's
which
a
I'm not
kinder way
against.
to say it.
I'm just saying it does.
It's smart. It's the way you have to work it now. Yeah, I think we're at a saturation point with content. I hate to use that word, but that's kind of what some of it turns into when there's just such a huge amount of it, right? Streaming there's been a lot of pros and cons with the streaming concept, and we're still in such a huge state of flux with distribution because of streaming, and it'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out. So
yeah, and just real quick, if you don't mind me just saying real quick, so Pastor's Kid, and this is the interesting thing with now this theatrical release that we're trying to figure out, is basically, so Pastor's Kid, and I'm gonna have to debrief with you sometime after this, Clark, and just give you all the download of all this, because it's just so interesting. But for Pastor's Kid, we're in theaters March 15th, 16th, and 17th.
Okay.
AMC picked us up. We're going to be, it looks like, between 20 and 30 theaters across the country. Okay. And this is the way that they're doing things. This is this grassroots way that's unique, is we get one showtime each day at each theater. And when those sell out, they add more theaters or they extend more days. And so that's what I think is a really cool way of, we're now seeing, like, I think indies kind of creep back into the theater in these, like, different kind of grassroots way. But my hope is, like, man, if we can see not just our film, but other films succeed with this kind of, like, we'll put up a time as people demand it, and if people keep demanding things, that's where we really change Hollywood, and we change the content that's being made. It's with the dollar, showing up at theaters like this.
Absolutely. Well, I'm extremely excited for your film, and cheering for your success as always, and I'm totally on board with you that these authentic films and these unique perspectives and voices, and maybe a little more room for that and a little less Marvel would make me happy camper. All right. Well, on that note, Ben, thanks so much for taking time to come talk to us and share your story. We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody out there for listening.
Again, we want to give a huge thank you to Benjamin for joining us on this special episode. Great guest, great conversation.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah, and we hope that you listening enjoyed as well. We're going to throw down in the links below in the episode notes. We're going to put a link to find out where you can see Pastor's Kid, whether that is streaming. I know it's also having a theatrical release in cinemas. So take a look at that if you're interested in seeing it. I'd recommend it. I got to check it out, and I believe you did too, Clark. It was a lot of fun, and I think, fun to talk about. It's a darkish movie, so maybe not fun is the right word, but it's a good one. I think it's again, as Ben kind of described, it goes beyond. Even if you're not a person of faith, it kind of transcends that. So definitely recommend checking those out in the link description. And thanks again. Hope you enjoyed.
All right, we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.